leadership, it's so much more than that. I see leadership as very future focused, not just for the organization, but for all the individuals as well.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of diaXpora. In this podcast, we will be exploring the stories, we'll be unpacking the stories, success, and challenges for international students who are navigating their career in Australia. Today, joining us in our podcast are two finance leaders who have made impressive leads in their career. And other than that, they have also built some mentoring and community building setups. So let's hear from them. Thank you, Calum and Czarina, coming to our podcast. Could you please give us a bit of an introduction about yourself to our audiences?
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. And thanks for having us here. So my name is Czarina. I've had a career in finance for over 20 years. And I studied here in Australia since I was a young kid, and recently graduated from UNSW in my Master's in Business Analytics program.
Wow, that's like I like that part. Like you have been in this field for 20 years and you still chose to go back to uni and do another course on business analytics. Like I've seen not many people do that, but that's really great.
Thank you. Not sure what I was thinking at the time, but
Yeah.
And hey, so I'm Calum McKinnon. So I've been in accounting and finance for a little bit less. So I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I'm a Kiwi, so if the accent didn't give it away already, I moved over from New Zealand about 5 years ago with my current company. And like Czarina, I've recently continued some study at UNSW as well. So I've just finished an Executive MBA at the AGSM.
Oh, that's great. So, Executive MBA. So, like, I don't have much idea about what goes on into Executive MBA, but sure, we will be exploring more about it in the podcast.
very exciting.
So yeah, let's dive into and let's begin by talking about the beginning, like what motivated you to come to Australia. Like maybe we can start with Czarina and then we can move on to Calum.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a little bit different because it wasn't my choice. It was my parents' choice. So my parents migrated, showing my age, 30 plus years ago. So I was only, I hadn't even started school yet. And I guess as a child, my role there was to adjust two different cultures: the Filipino culture of a migrant family and that of Aussie culture of a kid growing up in the 80s in Australia, where there weren't many people that looked like me all throughout school. Yeah, so that's how we came to Australia, and I guess my challenges were always about adjusting to the Aussie culture from growing up as a kid or going through high school. We lived out in Western Sydney, but I went to school in North Sydney, so it was always a clash of cultures every single day that I was seeing. And at such a young age, I wasn't understanding what I was seeing. It was only until I really got into the workforce that I start to make sense of the world a little bit more.
Yeah, and it must be really hard. Like you moved to Australia at such a young age, and then again adapting to a completely different environment. Was it hard for you in terms of adapting to the language and adapting to the culture? Like I reckon the education pattern back in Philippines and back here in Australia would be completely different.
Yeah, you're spot on. So, like I said, I was being brought up with a family that had just migrated, which means they didn't know the Australian culture either. My parents themselves were trying to assimilate. So I didn't have anyone, and we were the first in my family to migrate. So we had no cousins, no aunties, no one before us. And so there was no one to guide me as to what and how to adjust into what growing up in the 80s looked like. So, you know, when there were kids that were always doing sports, I was told to stay home and study, right? And I didn't understand why my friends could go out and play sports, but I had to go home and study. So it was still very much that a very hard education focus upbringing. And I guess it wasn't until when I became I think maybe when I became a mother myself, that I realized how much of that was being passed on, but then also my own experience and shaped how I parent and how not to parent. Yeah, so it was tough. It did take a while for me to adjust, and I think a lot of that also impacted my confidence, whether it was at school while I was still learning, in the workplace, because I may not have had the confidence to speak up. Yeah, so yeah, it was challenging, but I feel like once I learned that I could have a voice, I haven't stopped talking.
Right. And for Callum, was it difficult for you as well moving from New Zealand to Australia? Like, is the New Zealand culture different than Australian culture?
So there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of similarities between New Zealand and Australia. And I think a lot of people think that the transition is very simple and very easy for Kiwis to move over. There are some subtle differences. So we call an esky a chili bin. We have jandals and thongs. So there are some language differences between New Zealand and Australia that I suppose is a bit humorous and can definitely start some conversations. The accent I've been caught up on a couple of times as well, but for me, I was supported by my company to move over. So I think Czarina and I were working for the same company at that stage. And my career aspiration was always to get some global experience, to get out of New Zealand, to broaden that a little bit. And so to have that support of the company to do that transition to Australia made it a little bit easier for me, but I was on the opposite end for Czarina. So I was the parent. So in this instance, I was bringing over 2 daughters and a wife. So Anna and Rachel they would have been about 4 and 8 at the time. Moved over during COVID, which came with its challenges as well. So trying to integrate within Australian culture, trying to make friends during COVID, it was pretty difficult.
And as you said, like the New Zealand accent is quite humorous. I think Australian is they are more sarcastic. So is sarcasm missing from the New Zealand accent?
A little bit, a little bit. Yeah, it more just results in some humorous conversations, a couple of misunderstandings every now and again.
Right. So, so Zarina, like as you said, like you moved from accounting and recently you did analytics. So, what helped you, or what motivated you to do this transition from accounting, finance, and go towards analytics?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's funny how things happen. So when I finished high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and my dad suggested, "Why don't you do a maths degree?" Oh, yeah, maths degree. I only did general maths at school. And and so I said, why not? I had to do a bridging course and all of that stuff, but eventually got into the degree, and it was good. Like, I still didn't know what my career aspirations were at this point, so I was happy to do, vectors and all sorts of things, and it was very interesting. But I got it probably a year and a half into the degree, and I thought, how do I get paid? Like, how do I get a job? And then especially when I walked into, one of the big maths classrooms, the whole lecture room would be the guys doing engineering. And I went, how on earth do I compete in here? Like, how do I get a job? So I think even at, 17 or whatever, without even going into the workforce, I thought, this is going to be difficult. And then I looked around, I thought, right, where's the money? Literally, where's the money? And back then, it seemed to be everything to do with accounting and getting into the Big Four. And that's what my friends are doing. They were going into cadetships, and I thought, yeah, why not? I'll switch to accounting. So that's how I switched to accounting. And funny enough, my dad's actually a computer programmer in the day, and my mum's an accountant. So I only went between one parent. You can see who my influence was. And then, so accounting kind of came easy, and like today, the kids are all, you guys are all doing so many internships. Back then, it was about getting casual jobs, right? So going through the agency and applying for a role, I had to learn how to type, because it was about the speed of typing and back then. And I just got lucky, I guess, with it's your life experience, the types of roles that I started to get. And when I started to do these casual jobs, the financial side started to become real. It became less of theory, less of just debits and credits, but more, okay, I'm now doing accounts payable. Oh, okay, I understand how that translates into the financial statements. I'm now doing store inventory and shipping boxes out to the delivery guy. Oh, okay, I see how that falls into the balance sheet. Anyway, so I learned very quickly that it was about, there's all these actions that appear on the P&L, and so that's where theory came alive. And I also learned very quickly that it was all about making decisions. We weren't doing things just for the sake of doing things, but it was about making decisions. So that naturally led me towards management accounting and FP&A, which is your management arm in finance. And then I think it was just a natural trajectory into analytics, because you could see that technology was changing. There's all this talk back then about big data, and there were dashboards coming up, and our tools for the longest time was just Excel. And I went, what's going on? And then that's when I decided to go dig a little deeper into what is this thing called analytics. It was COVID, so I took a short course, and it just opened up my eyes. And so that's when I went, you know what, I want to know more. I need to know more. And that's what got me into the master's program, and then just applying whatever I learned into the workplace, and started to see real tangible outcomes.
So yeah, your kind of inspiration was you found a gap while you were working in finance, and then you thought of, okay, yeah, there's a problem here, and you need to learn about it, and yes, you went forward for it.
Yeah.
So for Calum, you also did accounting, and I think previously you did bachelor's in arts as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you moved to accounting. So how did that transition happen from arts to accounting? Like, it's completely two poles apart.
Well, it was, so this is going back to my undergrad. So this is about 15 to 20 years ago. So it's a bit of a stretch. But when I started out, when I went through high school, my dad was a CA, so he was a chartered accountant. He ran a small accountancy firm in the village that we grew up in. And my after-school jobs were kind of at the accountancy firm. So friends had paper runs. I was reconciling checkbooks. And so I kind of had this career path for a very long time that I said, look, I want to go into accounting. So I started my degree, Bachelor of Business Studies, or a BCom, in accounting and finance. And as I went through that degree, it became more and more apparent that the way the global economy was moving, the way in which I saw particularly China was growing as a country, as an economy, there was a huge realization that this was maybe a place that I could leverage some of my skills in the future. I also met my wife during university as well. So she's Chinese, and so with my parents-in-law not being able to speak English, I thought, okay, look, how about I go back? If I'm going to eventually work in China one day, or work with China, if my wife is Chinese, if my parents-in-law can't speak English, I'll put in some effort myself. And I did the Creative Arts, majoring in both the language and the culture.
Wow. I did not know that.
So your motivation to learn a bachelor in arts, what came from after your marriage, after you met your
No, it's because you wanted to get married.
Yeah. I needed to go to my in-laws and ask their permission. So my parents had taken me to Hong Kong when I was 18. So I'd had a little bit of a view of what the culture was like. And definitely, I think we've seen in the last 10, 20 years, the progress that's been made there, particularly from an economic perspective. It's kind of come to fruition a little bit. So, yeah.
Wow, cool. So now let's move on towards your career progression over time. So Czarina, you have worked now. You have led teams, and you have worked in the FP&A space for a really long time. So what do you think? What are the skills needed for a student to get into this area of finance?
Yeah, I mean, definitely FP&A, you do need that accounting background. Because we're at the end of the process. So if we think of it as a input output, every activity in an organization will lend itself to a financial transaction at some point. So whether at some point that's your collection of your data, something happens to it and it appears on a report or some analysis document. But FP&A is about explaining what's happening. So it's very hard for someone to come into FP&A without understanding how the P&L comes together. So finance and accounting is still a core competency. That said, I do have a team that has a very strong accounting background, but also some with very little experience in finance, but very strong on the data side. Right, because the other part of FP&A is the commercial aspects of really understanding what's going on in the organization that brings your financials to life. Because the role of FP&A is to help the management team understand where the business is ultimately headed towards, and what are the where are the risks and what are the mitigations that we can put in place. So it's about providing trusted information so that we can make the right decision. And if you think about that from a, again, end-to-end perspective, it starts with good data, right? So to make I know sometimes, early on it was always me being very, I guess, selfish, right? Because I knew if we're at the end of the line and I didn't control the process that got us there, well, I'm going to have a lot of long nights and a lot of heartache and pain. And that's not the quality of life that I wanted for me, nor was it for the people that worked in my teams. So with that in mind, we make sure that everyone down the chain, they're having a good experience. They've got the right systems, they're upskilled, they understand their job, they understand where they are in that big picture. Because part of the FP&A role is to govern that process, right? So FP&A, for those that know, that's where we do the budgeting, the forecasting, the strat plan, variance analysis, helping understand why things happened compared to what we thought was going to happen. There's a lot of systems thinking in that, and a lot of making sure people have the right processes, the right tools, and a good understanding of where they fit in the whole system.
And you mentioned like you have a team, like they're specialized in accounting, but they don't have not much knowledge in finance. So can you explain me how that works? Like, isn't accounting part of finance? And
Yeah, no.
or you need what knowledge you need to have for broader understanding of finance?
Yeah, so let me say that again. So in FP&A, you need to have a good appreciation of accounting and finance. You need to have you need to know how a P&L comes together, because the role of an FP&A team is to bring your financial statements together. You've got your accounting team that runs consolidation, so they'll do that from a statutory perspective. But from an FP&A's perspective, that's where a lot of the modeling comes in. So we're typically creating models from scratch that are reflective of what the business is doing, applying scenarios and different types of, I guess, models, whether it's pricing, whether it's cost, trying to come up with the optimum outcome. But doing accounting is not necessarily the job of FP&A, because you've got accounting teams that do that. FP&A is to bring it all together, understand what's happening, and translate it into, I guess, the commercial and the non-finance language.
Yeah, so FP&A team is kind of like builds insight from the accounting data.
Absolutely, yeah, and all the data else around it, right? So what's going on in the market, the finance business partnering concept comes into play here. So you're not just a team on its own. You need to work with your consolidation team. You need to work with your finance business partners, which are your commercial arm. So they're the ones really translating the results and the insight, and speaking with your head of sales, head of HR, head of production, to say, right, this is where we've landed, these are the causes, these are the drivers, and here's what we want to do. FP&A brings all of those inputs, consolidates it, and says, right, based on all of these inputs from what's actually happened, where we see the risk, where we see the opportunities, here's where we think we're going to head in the next 3, 4 months, 6 months, or whatever that period might be. Yeah, so it's very much forward looking, which is where the analytics, I think, really plays a nice marriage, because with data and analytics, it's the same principles. It's what's happened in the past to derive the future.
Yeah, it's kind of bridging the gap between the data, like data points gathered, and creating insights from them, and then creating a of the future perspective, like a forecast for the entire organization.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I feel like it's got a very nice marriage. So that's the whole purpose, is how do you blend the two together? Because at the end of the day, you break up that P&L into so many different parts. There's so many different problems, so much data, and now we've got access to different skills, different technology, so that our analysis and our ability to derive these insights is so much stronger than what it was when all we had really was Excel and PowerPoint.
Right. And Calum, you have led very large projects and led some big teams.
Yes.
So can you walk us through, like, how should one develop these leadership skills, like managing these teams and like such big projects?
Yeah, so if I give a bit of about what kind of helped me grow as a leader, and a lot of this came from mentors like Czarina and others, and the two things that I've really kind of latched onto, one is an opportunity. So there's been a lot of opportunities that I've been given to practice and experiment, as well as identification of growth edges. So one of the things that mentors do really well is they're quite direct in saying, you maybe need to work on this, or this is a strength and you should really develop it. So for me, my starting out, like I said, my dad was a CA. He was, for me, very transformative. He modeled the way in terms of what values around honesty, integrity, and hard working. And being in his accountancy firm, it gave me that safe space to kind of practice a little bit more. I kind of probably got a little bit more leeway than if I was out in the commercial world. So I got to make mistakes. I got to practice. I got to install computer systems at client sites. It was a really exciting time, and he provided a lot of feedback. In terms of growth edges, I suppose one of my early managers, he saw me, he saw where I was and where my path was. Stuart, he gave me a lot of material. He introduced me to authors like Blanchard and Carnegie and De Bono. I worked with strategy managers. I think it was Neil was one of our strategy managers. Introduced me to Week and any old map would do. Psychologists who taught about rhetoric and the art of persuasion and things, and how to get business cases approved. So there's a lot of inputs that can really influence how we grow and as a leader. And it's a case of taking the hopefully the best of what we get, practicing with it. We won't always get it right. There's a lot of mistakes that get made along the way, but that's how we learn. That's how we learn and how we grow.
So, like, I would say more of your leadership skills came from the fact that you read a lot of books on it, and got a very good mentors to help you kind of build yourself as a leader.
Yeah, and practice. A lot of practice and a lot of experimenting. Yeah.
So, I just had this epiphany. Like, what do you think leadership is about? Is it about serving others as a more broader, I'll just try to structure it in a better way. Yeah. So, is leadership more about inspiring others or serving others?
So
What do you think about that?
for me, yeah. So for me, I've grappled for a long time about the difference between like leadership and management. Management is very KPI driven. It's very, we're trying to achieve a specific outcome, usually for the company or for the organization. Whereas leadership, it's so much more than that. I see leadership as very future focused, not just for the organization, but for all the individuals as well. The team that we've been entrusted with, that it's a very privileged position to be leading a team, and you get the best outcome. I've seen getting the best outcome from that team, getting a high performance, driving high performance, is where there is really this clear vision for not just the organization, but for the team and for the individuals as well. Because setting that, helping the team come up with that vision, getting everyone aligned to it, really drives a commitment to achieve it. So in that regard, leadership's, I see it more as, I think you brought up the word, which is so that servanthood, right, or servantship, that servant leader concept, right, where you're helping everyone to grow. You're giving up something of yourself as the leader to help the team grow.
Right. And like there are a lot of news to students out there who are freshly graduated and they have started their career, but they are not in the leadership position. But eventually in the future they would be someday. And how should they like build these skills about leading a team in even before they get into the managerial role? And like what sort of steps should they take? Because at the beginning of their career, it's very hard for people to find mentors. They don't have proper guidance. They just go along the flow, how it takes. But to build those leadership skills, even before they get there, how could they start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it is definitely just being about being present. It's in all the little things, right? So you might be on a Teams call, and I don't know what it's like in organizations, but sometimes most people have their camera off, right? That's no longer being present. You've heard about, we fought for so long about having a seat at the table, right? So in this digital format, a seat at the table is equivalent to having your camera on, because it just means you're there, right? If it's not on, then you're not there. It's those little things with the work from home flexibility that we have, right? Come to the office. The flexibility is there, and it's probably going to be there for a long time, but it doesn't mean you stay home. It means you come to the office because that's where you're going to get that engagement, right? Like, don't get used to the fact that you have a meeting, you turn it off, there's no one else to talk to, right? The absolute gold in conversations and in collaboration happens when you leave that meeting room and you're both going to get a coffee, and you've just talked about that meeting, and all of a sudden you've come up with a great idea, right? We don't get that experience by not being at the office. And then the other thing is, for me, especially in FP&A, because it is about communicating, and it's about communicating to management teams to help drive decision making. If I can't see my team engaging just with the, especially if English isn't your first language, right? If I can't see how you're engaging just with your teammates, not even the core team, but the wider finance team, how can I put you in front of a management? Right? Because I haven't been able to see how you're interacting. I haven't been able to see how are you going to behave in a manner if I put you, because that's my role at I'm putting you there because I want you to practice. I want you to learn how to engage with different types of stakeholders. But if I can't even see it in the kitchen, how can I put you in front of a manager? Right? So this is why that's where the leadership is going to start to develop. Your ability to communicate and connect with people, because the things that were the work, that'll develop over time, right? The more data I give you, the more reports I ask you to do, the more P&Ls I ask you to run, you're going to develop it. But the real skill is in articulating what's going on.
Always ask the why.
Correct. Yeah. Just because someone said, I need this report, you're like, okay, I'll go get you the report. Why? If you maybe told me what you were actually trying to do, I could have given you a better outcome, right? And I feel like that's where that's that bridge, because now students coming in have all these amazing skills, right? You learn how to really ask what the problem is, and the ideas that you come up with are beyond the ideas that I will ever come up with, right? Because I just don't have that lived experience that the kids are now having, especially with tech. Right? So without really putting yourself out there and just say, hang on a minute, I know, I gave you that report the other week. Could you just maybe explain to me or help me understand what you use it for? What were you actually looking for? Because I may have given you a report, but you may have asked 10 other people for other reports because you were trying to put something together in your own mind, right? But if I actually understood what you were doing, perhaps I can have helped you differently, right? So it's just those little things. And the more curious you are, the more engaging you are, people then start to see, oh, okay, I remember, I had this great conversation with Calum. Maybe I'll pull him in the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, that's like those are kind of 3 points I would say, like be present, be active, be an active listener, and always ask why to the task that you're doing. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk more on the future of finance, how it's gonna evolve. Yep.
Yes. Maybe.
Yeah. Um, so moving on, now I'm talking about the future of finance. Like recently, we did a podcast on sustainability, and we
I heard that. I
discussed,
listened to
yeah,
that. That was
discuss
fantastic.
short. We didn't have much time, so we discussed a little bit on sustainable finance.
Yeah.
But now, since you both are the finance leaders, like we would like to understand more about what sustainable finance is and how it's impacting the organization and why is it important.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, it's definitely so. This is definitely a very rapid moving and developing area, sustainable finance. I remember um, 15 years ago, I would have been working on writing business cases for solar farms or for LED streetlight upgrades. And I had the opportunity to work with biogas digester units attached to water treatment plants. And so there definitely was an investment in what we would have called green energy or sustainability. But back then, it was very narrow sighted. It was the view was very narrow. It was focused more on energy consumption or what would now be like Scope 1 emissions. So, in the case of the biogas engine, it definitely it was important to report about the finances, whether this is making money, but it was also important to report the fact that in a given period, we'd supplemented it with natural gas, and we'd burnt 200,000 kilowatt hours of natural gas to generate 20,000 kilowatt hours of energy, of electricity. So forgetting the buying, retail, selling wholesale, forgetting the finances side of it, obviously that's not very sustainable from an energy or emissions perspective. If we fast forward now, right, if we fast forward now and we see a lot of the development that we've seen in this space, with I think you mentioned earlier, Czarina, the importance of really understanding systems thinking is becoming more important to try to solve probably what has now been coined as more like these wicked problems that are just really interconnected and really difficult to solve. Things like housing, things like poverty. If you go on the UN Sustainability Development Goals, they have a list of goals that they're trying to achieve in terms of sustainability. And I think finance absolutely has a place to play in this area. We've seen developments where the IASB, so the International Accounting Standards Board, has spun off the ISSB, so the International Sustainability Standards Board. So we're starting to develop standards around how we can collect that data, we can feed it through the system, we can do the analysis to really drive decisions that hopefully result in a better outcome. But it's a developing space. We don't have tools or systems at the moment to really capture Scope 2 or even Scope 3 emissions. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in this area next.
And even before all of that, I mean, if you ask me very honestly, I don't know anything about it, right? But it's coming. It's here. It's present. It's in fact impacts all our lives. We've got a interesting story where one of our core strategies is around sustainable products, and I got called in to just sit in and help create and form that strategy. Actually, I don't know why I got called. I was asked to come into one of these meetings, and I sat there and I was thinking, oh, what's everyone talking about? And funny enough, as I was driving towards that very first workshop, I realized it was about electricity. And I realized I have no idea or anything, no understanding about energy generation or the electrical grid. And so the 45-minute drive to work, I literally put on a podcast learning about energy. And the podcast guy said, on it, energy cannot be created, only transferred. Like must it be basic science, right? But I literally pulled over and I messaged my kids and I said, did you know energy can only be transferred? But all of a sudden I had this, okay, I feel like I understand what we're doing now. And then so my role was then to go in and understand, heads of R&D, heads of product, to try and work out what on earth were they saying. So lots of different, this is strategy development, right, around this space. And at the end of the day, I'm absolutely no expert in that. But I found that I was able to contribute because when I applied the not only systems thinking but human-centered design, I went, right, who actually is our customer? Right? Like I don't have to understand the technicalities of this. I don't have to understand any of the technology, but from just a very layperson perspective, I kind of understand what you're doing now. But from a company strategy, who are we selling to? Who's our customer? What's the value proposition, right? And so those are the things where, like I said before, it's about asking questions, etc. So whether that path leads me to a deeper and better understanding of the concepts that we're talking about, sustainability, and then the scope emissions, fantastic. And then just as an aside, the other night I was literally helping my 16-year-old with her economics, studying for economics, and the subject she asked me to help her with was on market failure and inefficient allocation of resources. And then I just delved into it. I'm like, oh my God, is this sustainability? Is this the formula that we're trying to resolve? And then I listened to the podcast with your sustainable one. I put the two and two together, and right now my head is just like going bonkers. I'm going, right, I feel like I'm at the start of something and like I'm ready to have this conversation. So I think in that space, not only are all these things where a lot of people that are already ahead of us are doing a whole lot of great stuff, but there's a whole lot of education that needs to happen for people that aren't necessarily even in this field. And it's exactly the same experience I had with analytics when I was trying to bring that into the organization where we didn't even know how to spell it, right? And so, but once you go through that education piece, everyone's natural ability, then you then grab hold onto what it is that interests you, and that's that diversity of thought that then helps propel it. So for me, I'm still very, very early on in this stage. I think for the first time I finally got excited by it, and I'm going, oh, is that sustainable finance?
And also, like using sustainable products, it just comes up with a higher price, which kind of impacts the profitability of the company. So what incentive does the company have going towards sustainable finance?
I think there are definitely going to be a lot of incentives that come, or disincentives. I think there's been discussions in the banking industry, for example, around investment, around loans, around ability to get capital, to acquire capital. From that perspective, that banks aren't willing to invest certain loans or certain products, or they will charge you a premium, potentially, or give you a discount. It can be that way. Or shareholders won't be willing to invest if you're not seen to be a sustainable company. So acquisition of capital is one area where businesses are really starting to have discussions around how this is going to impact them going forwards.
I think for me, it's more around the investment in, say, finance teams, understanding what is actually happening, right? Because just from the very little that I know in a couple of the seminars that I've been to, the recording of, and correct me if I'm wrong, the recording of these initiatives mimic a finance system, which is why a lot of it is coming to finance teams. We don't care. We read the P&L, we communicate the P&L, right? Now, how do we help finance understand why reporting on environmental sustainability initiatives is important, right? Otherwise, it's going to become a debit and a credit, right? So it was a bit harsh for me to say we don't care, but it's more around our day job is managing the transactions, etc., right? And then there's a part of that chain in finance that has to do the explanation and the storytelling and understanding why things have happened. So those skills are transferable into the sustainability space, but we need to understand that that's what's coming on and uplift that capability. And then you follow, I'm thinking you follow then the structure of the rest of the organization, right? There's going to be a body where a group of people where we provide that information to. So that group can then make the appropriate decisions. But just because finance are the ones running it, it doesn't mean, it's not right to have the expectation that we're now the environmental experts in that space, because how do you, it's part of the whole process of I guess reporting. Yeah, so I feel like I'm still very young at this. I'm still trying to understand, but yeah, it's my current thought process.
The whole industry is still very young in this. I remember if we were to write a business case 15 years ago, I'd do a model, and it would be based on cash. How much cash is option A going to give us, and how much cash is option B going to give us? And ultimately, that will become the most significant weighting in the decision of whether we go with option A or option B. I think now with that modelling is still sitting a lot of the time with the finance teams. That ownership of that modelling is sitting with the finance teams. But it's becoming more important for us, like Czarina said, to get up to speed with all of this, to say it's not just option A and option B based on cash. It's what's actually the downstream impacts of this from an environmental perspective, from a diversity perspective, from a business sustainability perspective. What are those other impacts?
And just because finance hadn't been doing it in the past, it doesn't mean that companies weren't doing it.
Yes.
Right. So like the organization I'm in, we've always been reporting on sustainability. It's just the nature of our products. But now with all the new things that are coming to light, there's a different focus and there's a different group that's being involved. So this means finance teams do need to educate themselves in this space. I feel like I'm late coming to that because I didn't actually know what I was meant to be learning. Right. And it's only literally in the last couple of weeks going, oh, maybe there is something here. Right? I attended quite a lot of seminars about scope 1, scope 2. I'm just thinking, what?
Right. And also, Calum, you mentioned like a lot of companies are doing acquisition of capital in this space. So can you explain in simple terms what do you mean by that?
In simple terms. So ultimately, if you want to grow a business, you need to get cash from somewhere. You need to either if we want to go buy a car, you can go to bank, you can get a loan, you can finance this, you can put it on your credit card, or you can go ask your parents for some money. Those mum and dad investors. And so if when it comes to a company, companies do the same thing. They have to go to markets to get cash, and those markets ask questions like, what are you going to spend cash on? What's the return we're going to get from giving you this cash? And how's this going to impact our reputation as an investor? And so people are getting more and more aware of not just the cash return, not just that ROI or that IRR. It's also what's the impact on the environment.
Right. On their reputation as well.
Absolutely.
And what are they doing to mitigate those risks?
And since companies are still at the very early stage, they are trying to figure out how to navigate this area. And since it's also new for company, it will be also new for students as well. And many of the universities, they won't be teaching. Few of them would be having these courses about sustainability or sustainable finance. But again, like if they have to develop an interest and gain more knowledge about this space, and how can they do that? Like what avenues should they choose? What courses should they follow? Yeah.
So it definitely it was a huge. There was a huge emphasis on sustainability and particularly shared value all through the Executive MBA. So it definitely is being pushed through a lot of degrees. I think if students are really interested in learning more about it, they can always subscribe to it depends on how technical you really want to get, but particularly if you're in accounting and finance, subscribing to the changes that are going through the ISSB at the moment, that's still developing. I know people who are making recommendations, and I'm not saying students are probably at the level of providing recommendations,
Right.
but definitely listening to how that is developing.
Mhm.
And there's a myriad of information out there. Like I mentioned, the UN Sustainable Development Goals is a great source of understanding some of the complexity of the problems that we're trying to solve, because these are not simple spend $1 million, the problem goes away issues. A lot of the time, the more we invest in trying to solve these problems, it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. Other issues just start to rise up, and so it's going to take a consorted global effort to solve some of these issues.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, I can only make it in parallel to my learning with analytics, because that was something that wasn't talked about in finance, and trying to introduce that not only to a finance team but to an organization, right? The same thing, and back then all the rage was about being a data scientist and doing data degrees, and then I came out of it and I'm like, okay, well, I still don't know how to code.
I think you don't need that. This is ChatGPT.
Yeah.
No, you don't. And then I've since had a go at actually building my first app, so that was pretty cool, no code. Uh, but I feel like it's going to be like that with the sustainability courses that are popping up, right? It's just going to be it's really, really early to see which way it's heading and how it gets incorporated into organizations. I do know some kids who are doing the sustainability courses, and right now that path is really into your Big Four consulting, right? Because if the consulting firms are still trying to build capability and learn themselves what it is, only then can they pass that on to organizations. So, and that's because it's so early on in that stage, and it's not to move away from that. It's absolutely to keep pushing, because it's something that we are going to need, and it's everyone working towards understanding and developing, and having a better appreciation of how we bring that into the mainstream.
Yes. I think the only other comment that I'd add on it, if students are looking at trying to develop a capability, I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, is around systems thinking. Really develop that skill on how interconnected things work. I think if we take supply chains as an example, which is starting to be disrupted a little bit globally with what's going on, we look at recent things. Tim Cook's mentioned it, many others have, around how interconnected the supply chains have come. And it's not necessarily, it's very simple to say, oh, we've offshored because of cost cutting. We've offshored because of cost cutting. That might have been the result, but that was not necessarily the why. Ultimately, the why was, well, we have better access to tooling and to natural resources. So we can develop our products faster. Coming back to that customer-centric design, we can innovate faster, we can deliver to our customers faster, so therefore demand goes up, so therefore we need more access to tooling, more access to resourcing, and it creates this feedback loop that allows us to deliver more value to our customers. There's a shared value that's generated in that. We do what we do best, and the supply chain does what it does best. When we start to play these zero-sum games that we're seeing playing out at the moment, it's just ultimately it destroys value. And I think from a finance perspective, one of the things that we do is we see that end to end. We see those operational inputs through to that financial P&L or cash flow. And to be able to draw those links is so important. And that's a skill that it can absolutely be applied in the sustainability space.
And speaking of system design, you mentioned, I have read, like, Czarina, you have a lot of experience in the design thinking approach towards a problem. So how does a design thinking approach, how should one start with that approach, and how it impacts from the traditional way of solving problem, like being solution centric?
Yeah, so I remember my world before being introduced to human-centered design, and it was chaos, right? You go into a boardroom trying to tackle a problem, everyone thinks they have the answer, and then you're fighting with each other to get to the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
Human-centered design focuses on the problem. It says, let's understand the problem first.
Mm-hmm.
Let's challenge each other on the problem, because then once we all understand the problem and we're all looking at it from the same side of the table instead of fighting with each other,
Mm-hmm.
now we bring in all our different perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
and let's come up with ideas, test the solutions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, when I was in the messy part, I was naturally drawn to just drawing on the wall. So when everyone was having these conversations, I'd be there with pen and paper and just like, what are you saying? What are you saying? And I'm trying, but how does that make sense? Like, you just said this, you just said that, it doesn't make sense. And when there was a gap in the conversation, I'd be like, hey, this is what you're all talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came across human-centered, and the way I came across it really was, I think it was my first subject in the master's program. After having gone through, what is data, predictive, you went through R, you went through all different types of techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And then right at the end of the book,
Mm-hmm.
it introduces human-centered design. And it starts off with, what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
And I went, what? Why wasn't this at the beginning? It would have made my life a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was through that I went, I need to know more about what this is. And so I just went on to, you go to Google, YouTube, and I went, oh my God, there's a whole discipline around here. Like, I've never known and I've never heard about it before. And so what I did, and this is where theory came into practice very quickly, is somehow I managed to convince my manager. I said, look, I've learnt this technique. I don't know anything about it. Are you okay if I have a go here at work? And so, just with our first dashboard, I said, right, instead of you telling me what you want, you're going to tell me what is our problem? Who is our customer? What are we trying to do? And so, and I did that with a group of people that not techie at all transactional. We didn't really understand the technology that we were using either. And then that was, once we finished that program, having followed that process to the letter, it was actually the catalyst for us to starting the analytics program. Because we took a group of people that didn't know anything about this. I didn't know anything about the subject matter. I didn't know anything about the company at that point. But we started with empathy, really understanding the problem, really understanding who the customer is, doing journey maps, doing the whole thing, and then mocking up what we thought could be a good prototype, sharing it with the stakeholders. So you started to bring engagement into it, a different type of conversation, a different type of conversation with our stakeholders. Whereas in the past, it would be, I want this. And we'd be like, here you go. Now it was more, right, I understand the problem you're trying to solve. Here's where we think, etc. Here's where we got the data, and here's the prototype that we've got. Does this solve your problem? And the response we got was phenomenal, because all of a sudden the problem that they were actually really trying to solve wasn't asking for a report, but to make a decision on certain things. And so for me, that then became, right, geez, that process worked. Let's try it again. Let's try it again. Let's try it again. And each repetition, we got better. We introduced different techniques, and then therefore our projects became bigger. Right? And so that's why I say I'm a big supporter of that mindset. Pick and choose what method works for you, but just starting with the customer, understanding the problem, applying that empathy, have the messy conversation, but have it on the problem, not the solution. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something I'm still trying to learn, because I still have the solution-oriented mindset. If faced with a challenge or a problem, I'll go into the solution mode, or how can I solve it, rather than actually understanding what the problem is and does the problem really exist. Or is it that we are looking at the wrong problem overall?
Yeah, I mean, you start it every time you do an exam, right? So I think, I mean, I haven't done an exam in a while, but if you are given the first 5 minutes to look through your paper, right? The first thing you do is like, okay, I'm not going to start to go to the answer. You actually go, right, there's 3 questions. I have 3 hours. How am I going to strategize? Like, you put your strategy first before you implement. It's the same thing. Back then, we used to ask for requirements, right? But that assumed I knew what I wanted.
Mm.
How can I give you, I don't even know what I want, but hey, here's my requirements, right? And then when I would receive something, it'd be like, well, that is not my problem, right? Because we didn't actually sit on the problem. So at some point, there is a place to still give requirements, but it's more from a technical perspective. And there's this step pre-idea, which is actually developing the idea. And that's where human-centered design plays a huge part, because it's focusing on refining and validating that idea before you go and spend any money, right? Yeah, and then knowing that when I do write my business case, hey, I've consulted, I've validated, I built a prototype. This is exactly what I want. But just to make sure we're still de-risking the project, I'll build it in small parts, right? So because now I'm going to spend money, build it, take it out, refine it, and that's where the agile concepts then come in. It does work.
Yeah. Iterative design.
So let's move on to talk about AI in finance. So now, since all these apps about Claude and ChatGPT and Perplexity, they are coming through,
I haven't even heard of it.
and companies are still adapting to the change.
Yes.
But it is evident, like a lot of the basic tasks, such as reconciliation, forecasting, and those kind of things in AI, could be done by AI. So do you think like the entry level jobs could be eliminated or reduced in the coming future?
I think there's definitely going to be a change. There's definitely going to be a change. Eliminated. There's a lot of work that we do now that we won't do in the future. But if we look at the past and we look and these stories are not new stories, but if we look at the equine industry, so horses and the need for horses and how motor cars replace them, whole industries disappeared that supported that. We look at the typist pool that might have been in the corner.
Yeah.
That as soon as we brought out computers, it no longer exists anymore. But then we sit there and we say, look, the world's growing, population's growing, unemployment hasn't just crept up with that population. We've created more jobs as a result of the technological advancement. I think for me, and when we were talking about this earlier, was it's going to be really hard for I think grads going forwards, because the expectation will change on what they can deliver. And so if you go into an entry-level job and the expectation is you're going to use a slide rule to do some calculation, well, the expectation is you're going to have a lot of time, or a lot more time, to come to the conclusion. Now we give people Excel, we give people calculators, and so the expectation is that you come to work and you can perform much more quickly. You can perform faster, you get up to speed faster. If we fast forward and we say, well, now grads are coming into the workplace, these entry-level roles are coming in with access to AI tools, I think the expectation on grads is just going to be exponentially so much more. This is what I feel. I don't think the jobs will disappear, but I think the expectation is going to increase quite a lot.
I don't know. I don't think. So I'll give you a backstory. When I would have grads come work for me, the first task I would give them would be to do the balance sheet reconciliations. If ever they came to me and complained, it meant they hadn't understood the lesson. So they would get more reconciliations. Because the purpose of doing those back balance sheet reconciliations is to ensure strength of your business, right? That's your balance sheet.
Right.
So if you're still seeing the task as tedious, you're not actually understanding the purpose. If that gets automated without that understanding, it was like back to what I talked about early on. How do you bring your financial statement to life, right? It was through that grunt work. So yes, AI can do the reconciliations. It can even run my predictive models for me. Another example with predictive modeling, we built our whole planning model on a system. Embedded in that is your machine learning, right? So that it'll show me a future regression. Like, oh, let me turn that on. Okay, I turned it on. Yeah, it kind of looked sense. then I thought, okay, if I present this to my stakeholders, what behavior and what message is that saying? Because right now, where we are in our maturity, yes, the technology is there, but from a maturity perspective, I'm still trying to get my stakeholders to take ownership of these numbers. So if I was to turn on that functionality, I'm essentially saying, hey, this is what the computer said. What do you think? Right, without having the right conversation or the right understanding of why these tools were built in the first place. So without that whole learning together piece, like at some point I will turn it on. I feel like I actually turned it on this year, but no one's actually questioned me on it, right? So there's a lot of change that needs to happen, a lot of education and understanding. So my favorite advice that I ever got was, you need to meet us where we're at. So no matter where I was in my own personal learning journey, whether I was getting excited by the new no-code device, technology that I can build my app, it's not where the company was at. So I leave that excitement over here and work out, right, where are they at? Reflect on my own journey. Go, how do I help them get to the next level? Right? So yes, the technology is there, but I don't think it's actually the expectation from the companies of the students. I actually think it's going to be the students are going to expect all of these things in the organization, but the companies won't have it. Right? So the students come in having played and done Figma and Bolt and I can't even remember, I don't even know what you guys are playing with, right? Yes. You've got access to all these technologies, but yet you come into a traditional workplace that's still on this path, and all of a sudden use Excel. And by the way, the data's over there, you know. Yeah. And then you're going to be, I could do it so much faster over here. No, company policy says you can't use ChatGPT.
Yes.
Okay, what can I use? I can use this, right?
Yes.
But this is so much better. So there is going to be an expectations gap, but it's going to come with a lot of frustration. So for me, the biggest skill in that, it's not whether or not AI is actually going to take over these jobs, because that's going to take a while for it to evolve. It's, does each partner, each group have the patience?
Yes,
right.
Exactly. To deal with that expectation gap.
Exactly.
And maybe you're right. Maybe for now the expectation gap is the students are expecting more from the companies. Yeah. But I think there will be a crossover in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yes, 100%. There would be a lot of friction between
as we grow.
What the newcomers know and where the
Yes.
company is at.
Yeah, and that's what I love about being part of DOOR, right? You see all this phenomenal skill in that room, and I just stand there and go, why aren't you working for me? Like, why aren't you in my company? You would make our lives so much easier, right? And then in the meantime, the kids are standing up saying, I need a job. Yeah. So there is definitely, and this is why I love this initiative. It's about, I think, bringing that conversation to the fold, that there is a bridge that needs to be not built. I think it's just rebuilding, because I'm pretty sure with tech comes and goes all the time, right? We're not the first generation to experience this, right? Like when the internet came on, what happened? What was the change that happened in corporate land at that time, right? The internet wasn't always there, but now it is. Right, and it's going to be like that with AI and all of these new stuff that everyone's coming up with, which is why I really have a lot of respect for the startup mentality, because I feel you can bring that startup mentality and that method into corporates, but it's just at a much slower pace because you have to apply the change.
Yes, right, and change management does take time.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And also I think like the bigger question that the newcomers need to have is like, yeah, AI will do the job, but again they have to understand the outcome. Like they also have to ask the why question more than the how question, like how to do it. They should be focusing on more on the why question, which might require more of their soft skills over there than the technical skills to understand that.
Because it comes back down to storytelling, transparency, trust, like we should be using these tools, right? But that's where the whole ethics conversation plays a big part. So, any students that's currently studying is pay attention to the ethics subject. It's not just a quick one and let's move on. It is a really, really important topic.
Right. And also with the data sovereignty, like the countries want to keep their data within the country, and like if they're exposing the company's organization's data to some AI model,
Yes.
It could be a risk to a company.
Yeah, exactly.
And in that regard, it's the same as you have a privileged position having the access to data at an organization. You wouldn't just go on the internet and email your friend a whole heap of data and ask for their advice on what you should do with this. In the same way, you would never email or ask a large language model that's hosted, that you don't know where it's hosted, what advice you should take on that data as well.